I came to work one day and I walked into the barracks and there was evidence tape, like yellow caution tape, the police tape, all over the evidence room. It said no entry,
Yeah.
under investigation, and I knew my number was up. I knew that they were eventually going to tie me, and I went to work for the next 32 days knowing that any of these days I'm going to be arrested. And believe it or not, they actually used my friends, my buddies on the SWAT team to actually take me down. And that was, I will say unequivocally, was the worst day of my life.
Hey, it's Lou Pimber. Welcome to Lou Pimber Speak, author of the book Breaking Badly, my very own post-traumatic success story. I think we all have a story in us. It's a matter of you taking the time to write it, put it on paper, and then go with it. You never know. You might inspire somebody. America needs inspiring. It could come from you. Listen, I want to welcome our guest today. I have a gentleman by the name of Chuck Ondo. Ondo, Chuck Ondo. Very cool name, by the way. Chuck, welcome to the show, my friend. Come on in, buddy. How you doing today, bud?
Hey, Lou, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, man. Thank you. I understand you at one point served in the United States Marine Corps. I believe it was from 1984 to 89. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it was a long time ago. I can't believe it's been 40 years already.
Oh my God. It's been a while, man. And then you were a Pennsylvania state trooper as well, working the highways for a minute there.
That's correct. Yeah. From 89 to 99, I was a state trooper. Worked the highways for about 2 years, but the large part of my trooper career, like you, I spent working undercover. I was an undercover detective in Philadelphia with the state police.
Wow. I love it, man. I love it. And then after that, you kind of went away for a little while. We'll get into that a little bit here, but tell me, man, what did you learn about yourself in the Marine Corps? How'd you end up in the Marines, by the way?
You know, it was a calling. That was my cat. The Marine Corps was definitely a calling. I was at a high school sporting event, and there was a guy who was a year older than me. He had come to the event and he was home on recruiting duty, and it was an evening. He was standing there in his dress blues and the sun was setting.
Yeah.
And this guy was really cocky and arrogant. When I knew him the year before, he was totally confident.
No, I don't believe that at all.
Come on. And, so it was literally like the skies opened. The voice came down and said, that's what you're supposed to be. And I remember going home that day and just telling my mom, I said, Mom, I figured out what I want to do with my life. I'm going to join the military. And she said, is that right? She goes, what branch? And I said, the Marine Corps. And she said, absolutely not. And, so it was a little bit of a battle. And, about a month after that conversation, it was October 23rd, 1983, when we had our first terrorist attack. The Marines were bombed in Beirut, Lebanon. And I remember coming home from school that day, and my family was gathered around, and they were watching the television set and the news. And there was 243 Marines killed that day. And my mom said, see, Chuck, this is why I don't want you to be a Marine. But I remember looking at her and saying, no, Mom, that's why I have to be a Marine. That was my 9/11, Lou. For a lot of guys, that joined in around that was my 9/11. And that was my gateway into wanting to be a Marine.
Yep. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. For some, it would be a reason not to, right? But in your case, it was the reason why you should. I think, many young men today have that calling, and many men don't have that calling. They don't see it. They don't hear they don't hear that internal voice saying to them, you need to go serve, right? You need to go serve your community. This is how we earn our keep. There's various levels of maturity, becoming a man, and And I'm just glad that there's a few of us who have in fact gone out there and served our country. So thank you for your service, man. What did you
It
learn
was
about
a
yourself in the Marines?
Um, the way that you can push yourself and physically, mentally, the mental toughness, as you know, is the biggest part of any game. And
Yeah.
no matter how hard they push you, you just kind of laugh it off, and you know that you can do it. So yeah, the confidence part of it, they beat you down for the first couple weeks, but for the last, 8, 9 weeks,
Yeah.
they get you to the point where you're ready to run through a brick wall. And it definitely, it fit with my personality. Perfect.
It's such a good feeling, right? It's such a good
Absolutely.
feeling. And so you receive your anchor and globe, and now you're ready to take on the world, right? You're ready to take on the world. And what was your MOS? What was your job in the Marine Corps?
So I was an ammunition technician, and we worked in the ammo dump. And I was assigned. We would be assigned either to the ammunition supply point, where units would come in. Even during training, there's always munitions coming in, going out, and then we would be assigned to, like, let's say an artillery unit would be going out for a training mission. You'd load it, make sure everything was loaded correctly, take it out to the field, and then, if something didn't go off, then you'd go out, assess the situation, and call EOD in. And that was going to be my long
Yeah,
term
like
plan,
something
was
private.
going to segue to EOD, but after 4 years, I decided that I was gonna move on with life.
It's like, hey, that round didn't go off. Did it go off? I don't know. Why don't we send Private Ondo out to go check it out?
I was
Like,
a Lance
let's go
Corporal.
check it
Yeah,
out, right?
yeah, exactly.
Corporal, that's corporal. I mean,
Yeah.
you had to have been a private at some point, right?
Yeah, you very
Right on,
briefly though.
man.
He was one of those guys that was able to recruit a couple of my buddies and graduated as a private
Oh,
first class from boot camp. So, you know, got that little
nice.
nudge up.
PFC.
PFC.
Nice. And that means a lot. I know in the Marines, that means a PFC's got some weight in those training settings for sure. For sure. And of course, the Lance Corporal. And then you were there 4 years that you left as a Lance Corporal, or were you able to make
No,
the
I
sergeant rank?
left
I
as
know
a
it's kind of
corporal. It
challenging in
was
the Marines.
interesting. I made corporal in my first 18 months meritoriously, but then to get to sergeant was pretty tough in my MOS. It depended on what your MOS was, and back then they had what we called a cutting score, and it was based on what your physical fitness score was, what your rifle range score was. But then if you took classes, and there were a couple other things that worked in there that would set it. And then there was the timing grade. You had to have at least a year as a
Yeah.
corporal to make sergeant. So
Well, that's
left
why
as a
you guys
corporal.
are the few, the proud.
Yeah, exactly.
There's not that many of you guys, so there's only so much room, man. But good, man. I'm grateful for everyone who served every branch of service in the military. I'm very thankful for everyone that is currently serving as well. So, you left there in '89, and that same year you became a cop. Is that about right?
Yeah, it was interesting. I got out. I think it was December of '88. I got out, and in January of '89, I came home and I decided, okay, what am I going to do? And back then, I opened up the newspaper, looked through the want ads, and wasn't sure if I was going to get into like a construction or the trades. And I saw an ad, the Pennsylvania State Police was giving their exam. So unlike a lot of people that, it's their lifelong goal to be a police officer, this was more of a whim. Read it, said, oh, you know what? I'll sign up for that. Took the test, did really well, and I had my extra points because of my military service. And but it did take almost a year
Right.
to go through the process, to go through the background, and to get accepted into the academy.
Got it. Got it. And so you get accepted. Obviously, you're obviously in top shape, and you're a disciplined guy, attention to detail kind of guy. How was that academy setting for you?
The academy setting, there's something like yeah, I wanted to touch on real briefly. God has blessed me in life. I get to the academy, we're there,
Yeah.
less than 24 hours, and I was named the student leader of the class. There was 50 of us that started, 44 of us graduated. But early on, I was identified as the class leader. So what my role and responsibility was I would meet with all the instructors in the morning. They would give out the itinerary for the day, what classes we're having, what gear we need, and then as we marched around as a unit, I marched us around. We had a we had a large military class for the 44 of us graduated. There was probably 25, 30 of us had prior military experience. So we were a really squared away academy class. We were the 75th
Yeah,
cadet class. And yeah, it was great to lead those guys. And I'm still such good friends with a lot of those guys today. And they all joke with me how they tortured me as their student leader.
awesome. I remember, the police academy is so. It's just another challenge. It was another challenge for me that I got to go through. Of course, having been in the military myself as well as an Army combat medic, and then as a cop, there was a handful, I think, in my class of prior military guys. There weren't that many, from what I recall. It was a bunch of guys out of college and a couple ex cops from other places. But I really enjoyed it. I loved the structure. It was a very high stress academy that I went to at the time. So yeah, I thrived in that environment. Getting smoked was, yeah, bring it on, right? And so academically, we did very well also. I'm very grateful for that experience, man. Very grateful for that experience. And so you complete the academy, and what's the process at PA State Police? How does that work? Where'd you go?
Yes. So when you finish the academy, we weren't back then. They've since rescinded this, but you weren't allowed to go back to your home area. You couldn't go back to your home troop. So I grew up in the western side of Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, um, and as the class leader, they gave me the list of where the openings were. So I had all the guys that were married and had families. We let them choose first as to where they wanted to go, so they could be stationed
I
as
see.
close to their homes without being in their home troop. So when it got to me, my choices were either to go up in the north part of the state into the Pocono Mountains as a rural trooper, or I could have gone. I went to Philadelphia, so I decided as a young guy wanted to get involved, ready to hit the streets. You know how that is, and I chose to go to the Philadelphia barracks. So that's how I ended up across the state in
Okay.
Philadelphia. And it was interesting, Lou. Here I was, a state trooper getting to patrol an area. I had never even visited Philadelphia, so I had no idea
Yeah.
where I was. But here I was. Thank God I had a
Wow.
FTO to train me up.
I know a lot of state police agencies do that. They'll put you in an area that you're not familiar with, and I can see when there's a need because there's no staffing out there. But I can see why a lot of places have changed that because you're already under enough stress as it is. Having just finished an academy, going through a probationary period, and then have to know the lay of the land. I see why they've changed that. I think people function better in their environment. And then, as needed, put them in remote areas, I guess, as needed. Do you think that's
Right.
why they did that? Any idea?
I know they don't want you around, the people that you went to high school or college with. They want you to have at least, the rule at the time was you had to have at least 3 years of experience before you went back around the people you grew up with, your old neighborhood, that kind of stuff. They wanted you to be a more seasoned police officer.
Huh. That's some old school thinking, man. That's some old school, way of thinking, I believe, you know? So at which point did you decide, "Hey, I wanna become a narc. I wanna work undercover." How did that happen?
Yeah, that was a great question, and this is going to tie into my story later. Uh, Back in the 1980s, while I was in the Marine Corps, I had an older brother that really struggled with. It was the time the crack cocaine came out, and I know it affected his life and was ruining his life. So even when I was in the academy, I always had this side of me that really wanted to fight the war on drugs, and as a young trooper working on the highways coming in and out of a major city, drug interdiction became something that I not only wanted to work on, I became really good at the interdiction side of it. I would watch vehicles come out of the suburbs into the city. I worked an evening shift. An hour later, I'd sit westbound and I'd be able to pick the cars off. There's usually several people in it. The cars were like hoopties, junkies, the junker kind of cars. You always had probable cause to stop them, and started making narcotic arrests. And then also just in regular patrol, I looked at every traffic stop as an investigation, and you get people from out of state. Back then, I know that, Philadelphia was a major city, between New York City and Baltimore. We would see a lot of vehicles coming through from Florida, heading up towards New York City. You make those stops
Yeah.
and you start investigating. And, I started to work closely with our narcotics detectives as I was getting these defendants to turn over and roll and flip and become CIs. So I
Yeah.
kind of set myself up for the undercover role doing drug interdiction.
Mm. Well, the 80s you described, 84, 89 was the big time, just say no to drugs, right?
Yep.
Dare and all those programs that had come out, right? And then 89 to 99, well, it was just like cocaine's party, man. It was cocaine everywhere coming up through Florida, up through Mexico, up to the Gulf. It was just coming in, man. It was moving, and so and and a lot of highway interdiction. You're absolutely right. So from there, you decided you want to do some undercover narco stuff.
Yeah. So as soon as I was eligible, I put in for it. I had already made a lot of ties with the guys working, and we had a unit. It was called the Strike Force, and it was a combination of state police, DEA, FBI, and some of our other state agencies. We had the Attorney General's office. So it was a combination of agencies working together, multi-jurisdictional, and we we had an office in South Philadelphia, and there was probably, I don't know, 30, 40 of us on this task force, and fell into it quickly. I grew the long hair, walked the walk, talked the talk, could fit in, had enough had enough street sense in me to be able to fit in. As you know, working undercover, there are some guys that's just not meant to. Guys cannot fit in.
Yeah,
They go to a bar and they're calling someone sir, and you got to be able to go with the
yeah,
flow. And for me, that was something that came so really natural. The bad guy
yeah,
in
yeah,
me.
yeah. So you actually worked undercover. You actually had conversations with dopers and bought drugs from bad guys.
Oh, absolutely. A lot, and there were times that it was, smaller street level stuff. Uh, Too, it was major multi-kilo deals. We worked
Yeah,
everything. And around that time, I also worked really closely with an agency. They were investigating the Philadelphia mob. There's actually a show on Netflix right now, Lou. It's called Mob Wars Philadelphia, and it's a three-part series. And if you, it's being it's narrated by the FBI director of the Philadelphia unit at that time, and I was part of that investigation. Actually, going in, hanging out in bars with guys that were mob related. And back then, in addition to the cocaine that you talked about, the other thing that was huge was it was the opioid pill epidemic. I
oh
worked
yeah,
some major cases with actually some high level mob guys that were dealing in pills. They had
yeah, yeah,
hooks in with a lot of the doctors in South Philadelphia, and they had a network of women that they would send in with fake IDs, and they were just getting scripts. They were writing scripts, like they were
yep,
Skittles, and we were
yeah.
buying thousands of pills at a time. So I was part of some of those major
Well,
investigations.
those were some crazy years, man. Those are some crazy years. And then you got crack cocaine coming in at the tail end of that. You know what I mean? Right
Yep.
around that time. Uh, um, yeah, I mean, back to working undercover conversation, I do joke with a lot of guys who look the part but don't go buy drugs. You know what I mean? Now I tell them, hey, listen, you can be a very good surveillance officer. Keep an eye,
Exactly.
okay, from far away, but just don't say nothing.
Yeah,
Now I will say
exactly.
this. I will say this. I will say this. I worked with the guy who was kind of that yes sir kind of guy. Like he looked like he spoke like an accountant. The guy can buy drugs. So accountants buy drugs.
Yeah.
Lawyers buy drugs, doctors buy drugs. And in my work as an undercover narc, I met with some interesting people who I would never thought turned out to be drug dealers in their, restaurateurs, former
Hmm.
judges, the guy you thought was I thought this guy was totally legit this whole life. And then of course there's your obvious criminal, met with so many different people along the way. So you're working in how long did you do were you in the drug task force? Several years, it sounds like?
It was over 5 years. I was part of the undercover drug task force. Uh, And the other big area that we worked in, a lot of people have heard of the part of Philadelphia. It's called Kensington. Kensington is like the epicenter of heroin. It's still a mess. Like if you go on YouTube right now
Wow.
and put in search Kensington, you'll see that it's just the whole world revolves around the drug trade. That area of Philadelphia is actually called the Badlands. So we did back then,
Wow.
before cell phones were popular, they did a lot of street level sales. And, you'd set up on surveillance and try to figure out who was running the corner, how they would do it, come in and sweep the whole corner, find out where the stash houses were. They had guys working in shifts at the
Yeah.
time. A lot of the dealers were smart. They had a lot of juveniles out hustling, doing the sales because they know if they got arrested, they're looking at juvenile time, and they're on and off the street. And it became a little frustrating. You're out there, you clean a corner, an area up, and literally days later, that corner's booming again, hustling. I mean, corners making
Yeah.
tens of
Yeah.
$1,000s, an evening.
One of the so many challenges in that career field, in that job, so many fun times as well, right?
Yeah.
I tell people you can only deal with so many I almost died moments, like, oh my God, this thing
Hmm.
happened, right? Another thing. When you work in that field, you know, it, you can't help but some of that stuff sticks on you. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Some of that stuff, it's like a plumber. The reason why a plumber takes certain inoculations is because he's exposed to stench. He's exposed to filth, right? As an undercover narco, we're exposed to those things. We're we're not necessarily immune to it. And the inoculation that I would receive from that was I went to a couple of DEA narco classes, integrity
Hmm.
classes, state integrity classes, all these things. And you know, um, at some point in time, right? Some guys screw up. I've seen it happen. And tell me what happened with you, man. Like you at which point did this whole thing change from you're the narco, you're the cop,
Hmm.
to now your things change? What happened, man? At
Okay.
which point did this start
Yeah.
changing
So
for
the
you?
interesting thing about it, the entire time that I worked undercover, I never crossed a line. It just to kind of set up how my story went. So in addition to working undercover, I was also on the state police SWAT team. After my third year, I tried out, became a sniper, went to FBI sniper school. So working as a narco full time, I was still on call to do SWAT call outs. And what happened over a couple year period is just I was involved in traumatic incident after traumatic incident, involved in shootings. I was undercover. I got robbed at gunpoint. I had an informant killed. Uh, and I witnessed a murder during a drug deal. I was hanging out with some guys. A car pulls up, guys jump out of the car and shoot the guy that's right in front of me. I was able to stay. That's a whole movie in of itself. I was able to, in an undercover
Yeah.
capacity, actually chase the guy down, and And during that whole time, you're working those crazy hours. What had happened is my home life started to fall apart, and alcohol really crept into my life, Lou. So, you know, you're involved in a stressful incident with the guys. What do you do afterwards? Hey, you go hang out. You go to the bar. It's acceptable. Alcohol is acceptable. It's what you do. You have a SWAT call out afterwards. So alcohol crept into my life, and then what had happened is my home life started to fall apart. I was married. I had a young son. I'm not coming home till 2, 3 in the morning. My home life started to fall apart. And I actually took a promotion to corporal. I had turned that promotion down a number of times because I loved being in the excitement and the undercover role. So I took the promotion to get out of the stress and hopefully kind of to save my home life. So my fall came after I got done working undercover. I got promoted to corporal. I was in charge of I was the staff services corporal at a barracks, and I was in charge of the evidence room. And it was around that time uh, that I had, gone back into uniform. I had a couple other stressful calls while I was in uniform. I had 3 teenage suicides in 1 week. And then I had an infant drowning. And then again, my home life was falling apart. And I had found something out. I had found out the person that I was married to had an affair literally the week after our honeymoon. And it was that
Wow.
event. So as a corporal at the barracks, I was the evidence custodian. So when you have a case come up, a trooper needs to take the evidence out, take it to court. So you sign it out, and when they come back from court, I'm going to explain just one day of where this all took, where my life totally changed. Uh, I had found out the day before that the person I was married to started having an affair the week after our honeymoon. And the very next day, a young kid took a small amount of drugs, a young trooper, small amount of drugs to a hearing. And at the end of his shift, he came back from court and said, "Hey, Corp, can you destroy the evidence?" So I signed a report, and I took that evidence, which was a small bag of cocaine, into the bathroom. And like I've done hundreds of times, I should have just flushed it down the toilet, signed the report. But I was there, and I remember just being real emotional and like literally physically like crying my eyes out and not wanting to go home and not wanting to deal with this situation with the person that I was married to at the time. And I thought back. I had a lot of conversations with people that I had arrested or people that were my informants, and I used to ask them, like, "Hey, why do you do this stuff? Why do you use drugs?" And people would say to me, "Well, Chuck, if you had my life, you would understand it," or "I want to escape from life." So there was a moment in my life, and that I just wanted to escape, and I thought to myself, "You know what? Let me try this." And it was that simple moment. Instead of flushing that dope down the toilet, I just opened the bag and I sniffed it. And instead of flushing that down the toilet, I flushed the next 11, 12 years of my life down the toilet. It was something that hit me instantly.
All right. Let
Um,
me.
I wrapped the bag up, put it in my pocket. My shift was over. I went home that night and used drugs for several hours. And it did exactly what everyone said it would do. This euphoria comes over you. And I
Well,
remember,
let me ask you something. Let me ask you
yeah,
something. Okay. Let me ask you something. That was a lot, bro, and I appreciate
yeah,
you sharing that. Two things. Um, isn't there a better way to destroy evidence other than flushing it down the toilet? Didn't
I
PA
know
have a better system than that?
yeah. When it was a small amount, Lou, yeah. I mean, a lot of times you would take a number of cases, especially if it was like big cases of weed, whatever. You would take it to an incinerator and it would get thrown in the incinerator. But for those small cases, and
Yeah.
it's so antiquated, and even you think about what it's doing to the water system. Um, but that's how simple it was. And
Yeah.
even the process. I remember after I was arrested, and my charges, what I eventually got arrested for, Lou, was tampering with evidence. When I was being interviewed by Internal
Okay.
Affairs, I said to them,
So
"There's got to
now,
be."
so now,
Yeah.
So now but number two, you reached a point where you just said, I think I'm just going to try this. How,
Yeah.
was there any voice in your head that says you probably shouldn't be doing this?
Yeah.
I'm,
Because I spent all those years taking it off the street. I saw what it did to my brother's life. I saw what it did to,
yeah,
hundreds of people that I arrested. But there was just this mental low point, this amount of stress that was in that I didn't turn to
yeah,
anybody else. Like finding this stuff out about the person I was married to, or dealing with seeing murders or seeing suicides. I never went to anybody for help. You look at it, and I'm sure you can relate to this. You're the guy. You're the SWAT guy. You're the sniper. You're the undercover guy. You're the state policeman. You don't need help. You're the person people comes to for help. So it's stuffing
right,
that in for all those
right.
years, and it just came to a head that one day. And it sounds so stupid when you go back and you look at it, you know, like, and then over the next 6 months,
Right.
every time that I would go and take it and use it, there was that voice, that inside, the cop in me, the
Yeah.
person that was loyal and had integrity, would get compromised because of that, wanting to escape. And then, what I found was probably within a matter of days or weeks, I became an addict. And now I understand, addiction. And that's why I
Wow.
still work with guys today about the disease of addiction and how
Yeah.
it can override your thoughts.
Let me pause you for a second. So you
Yeah.
said you you went through a lot of traumatic events in your career, a lot of traumatic events in your life, personal life, spousal stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then murders and suicides and all these things, which I totally get. Did the department not have any resources for you to go get? Hey, listen, I need some help, man. I need to talk to somebody about what's going on through my head right now.
Yeah, that's a good question, Lou, and they absolutely did. We had a members assistance program. But amongst the guys in the locker room, our overriding thought was, not going to go talk to anybody. They're going to take that and use that against you. And you can't go and tell anybody you're weak. They're going to take you out of
Yeah.
that role as a sniper. You're going to lose your SWAT experience, your position on SWAT. They're going to pull you out of undercover. And you were afraid to actually go admit that you needed help. I see that has totally changed, and a lot more departments have a lot of other things in place now. But back then, it was one of those things. It was looked down on. Hey, that guy needs help. Well, then tell him to go get another job. You know, that's the attitude that I would
Let me
have,
ask you
and that's
this. Let me ask you
how I
this.
felt guys would treat me.
Had had because I remember hearing that too around those years too. But had it ever actually happened? Did you ever actually see a case where a guy went to get help and he gets put on death studio to give him a rubber gun, quote unquote, right? Did you ever see
Yeah,
that happen?
I can't say that I can actually point one out. I know there was always the proverbial rumor of, yeah, Jones, as soon as he went and got some help from members assistance, he lost his detective position. He went back into uniform, or he got put on the desk duty. Yeah, there was the rumors of that, but did I ever see anybody? I can't think back to any case like that, though.
I often wonder, man, because I never saw one either.
Hmm.
However, I did see where guys would screw up and they would get suspended or they would get relieved of that duty for a period of time. Um, but I have heard of guys who say the same thing, had all this trauma going on in their life, and were too afraid to talk to someone. And I often wonder in the back of my head, Ondo,
Yeah.
was it just a nasty rumor that was based on a little bit of truth and mostly rumor? If so, whoever started that rumor, whoever perpetuates that rumor, you're just responsible for the downfall of so many other officers, you know? Um, But yes, I think it should be more spoken of openly, where there are no repercussions that these things happen. And I think it takes a lot of a man or a woman to come forward and say, "Hey, man, I need some help."
Mhm.
Right? Um. So okay, I just wanted to ask that. Anything else on that?
No, and now, I actually I'm part of an organization where we actually go out and we talk to police officers. I've been back to the State Police Academy and have told my story, and I'll go to departments and say, to the guys on active duty, right now you're sitting here, you're in uniform, and you're thinking, you know what, Ondo, I would never do what you did. I've got more integrity. And what I tell them is you never know what point in life that you might make this decision or something might trigger it
Yeah.
that you got to go and you got to go get help. So it's much more widely talked about now, and I think departments across the country are doing a much better job at it.
That's good, man. That's good. I think it's a good thing you going to talk to these guys in the academies and addressing it with them, because the path you went down, you you said you became an addict in a number of days. Like,
Mhm.
you were fiending for this stuff. What were you using during that time? And tell
It
me, how
was
did
it,
this end you up? How did this end up causing you losing your job and your
yeah.
freedom?
So it was always for me, it was powdered cocaine. I thank God I never got into heroin or
Yeah.
meth or crystal meth or anything like that. Um,
Jeez.
it was accessible. Uh, and initially it was a couple of times that I was supposed to destroy the evidence and I took it. But then when the addiction kicked in for me, I would go into the evidence room and I'd go into cases that were there from the 70s, the 80s, that should have been destroyed, years ago, and their bags had already been opened, had already been tampered with because they were taken into court. Someone that just was lazy and didn't do the reports and never got it destroyed. And I would go into those bags and take out about half the amount of whatever it was, replace it with baking soda, and then zip it back up. And this went on. My addiction went on, Lou, for about 6 or 8 months, where I lived this double life, from 8 to
Wow.
4. I was a uniformed corporal with the state police, and I had one incident where I actually, um, I tried for the most part never to cross the line while I was in uniform and use it. I would wait until I was off. But there was one day I was asked to work overtime, and the addiction had already in my head. I had already taken an amount of cocaine out of the evidence room. I got asked to work overtime, so I was sitting at my desk, and unbeknownst to me, I didn't want to sniff cocaine and sniff and have a runny nose. So I put the cocaine in my coffee. And I actually ended up overdosing in the barracks in uniform, and nobody knew that it was from cocaine. I completely lied to everybody. So I'll set this
Hang
up
on, hang on, hang You put the cocaine where? 'Cause the
in
audio
my
cut out
coffee.
from here.
I'm sorry, I put it in my coffee.
In your coffee.
And I thought,
In
okay,
your coffee.
I didn't know anything about addiction. I didn't know anything about drugs. And Lou, that's the same thing as if I'd have
Yeah.
shot it.
Wow,
So
bro.
I dumped this cocaine in my coffee. I take a couple sips. Next thing you know, the room's spinning. I feel like I'm gonna have a heart attack. And next thing you know, I woke up and my sergeant was on top of me and I had his wrists in my hands. And he's like, Ondo, let go of me, let go of me. And I'm violently shaking. And I calmed down, and I had bit a chunk of my tongue off because I had such a violent seizure from overdosing. And the guys rushed me to the
Yeah,
ER,
yeah,
and I felt like such a piece of crap because here I have these guys are all worried about me, and I lied to them. People started
yeah,
to notice something was going on with me, and what I would say to
yeah,
them is, "Yeah, I lost a little bit of weight. I'm not working out. The stress that I'm going through a divorce. I'm not eating right. And totally
yeah.
lied to them. So here these guys are all standing around me, and the doctor comes in the
Looking after you.
emergency into the room, and he asks all the troopers, "Hey, you guys got to leave." And when they walk out, he says to me, he goes, Mr. Ondo, I don't know what's going on with you. He said, but I'm not, because of the doctor patient confidentiality, I can't say anything to all those guys out in the hallway. He said, but I'm going to tell you this. And he had
Right.
the blood test results in his hand. And he said, if you weren't 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, and in good shape, you'd be dead right now. The amount of cocaine in your system is staggering. He said, you need to get help.
Wow.
And you think that would be enough to stop me? I overdosed in the barracks, and I still went on to use cocaine for another 3 months. That addiction was just so ugly. And, I lied to everybody. I told everybody, hey, I had low blood sugar. I wasn't eating right that day. I've been stressed out because I'm through the divorce. And I felt so guilty for carrying around that shame, uh, and there's an interesting thing, I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you have any questions about that, but there's an interesting dynamic that I want to share about what I was going through. So
Go ahead,
when
buddy.
when I worked undercover, I had the long hair and the goatee and the beard and dressed the part. A lot of people would say to me, Chuck, you look the part, you talk the talk, you walk the walk. Aren't you afraid you're going to fall into that lifestyle? And I would say to them, no. You know why? Because when I look in the mirror, you know who I see? I see Chuck with the high and tight haircut, with the big Smokey Bear hat on, in uniform, clean cut, shaven, because that's who I am. Here, the roles reverse themselves. Here I was in the
Yeah.
morning, Lou, I'd be putting my
Hmm.
uniform on, and I would tear up because when I'd look in the mirror, I saw someone that was a junkie, someone that was living this seedy life after work.
Yeah.
And my addiction was, it wasn't like Ondo was out having fun and partying. It was, I would go to my apartment, I would lock the doors, I'd go into the bathroom, I'd lock the doors of the bathroom, and I would just use drugs. Um, and there was no fun in it. It was an ugly, ugly addiction. But those roles reversed themselves where, I would beat myself up every day, putting the uniform back on because I felt so hypocritical. And that went on for about,
Did you have kids at the time?
yeah. So I had my son, he was about 3 at the time. And I was able to just, the days that I had him, I would be able to refrain from using it. But
Yeah.
probably 3, 4 nights a week, I was living that double
Wow.
life of using drugs. And with cocaine, it's not a physical addiction like heroin or opiates. It's a mental thing. So at times, or if I knew I had my SWAT training for 5 days, there wouldn't be any drugs involved. I wouldn't have drugs with me. But the second that I had, got off that and it was free time, boom, I'd go get some and go find my way into my apartment and use. It was a horrible thing to go through. And that's why I have such a
Let
passion
me ask you
now.
this, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're at a point in your life where now you're reflecting, and you know that what you're doing is wrong. Yet, you know, you've been a Marine. You understand about loyalty to the men next to you. You understand about loyalty to your country. You've gone through a law enforcement academy, similar environment, similar ethos. How does it that none of that stopped you from stop you from all that behavior?
You know, I could sum that up in that's why addiction is called a disease. It's a mental disease. And they've done so many experiments, even with mice. They'll they'll put them and they'll have their food and water, and then they'll have cocaine, and that mouse will go back to that cocaine until it's dead and pass up food and water. It's and until someone has fallen into that addiction. And again, that's why I'll say this over and over, that I'm so passionate about helping people now that are, and there's a number of different things that triggers the addiction in people. And I'm a firm believer that there's a percentage of the population that has an addictive personality. Uh, I don't know about you, Lou,
Yes.
but when I put my heart to something, my mind to something, whether it's working out, whether it's shooting, whether it's, you know, uh, I become obsessed with it. And at times that
Yeah.
addictive personality is good, if you're working out or if you're, training for something, you know, but when it comes to, having that addictive personality and then you mix in alcohol and drugs, that's why it took me down that long, dark road, that having that personality disorder.
You mentioned addiction. At the same time, I'm not sure if you said that or not, but others call it an illness, right? And I think it does lead to illness, but I think we choose. Some people just choose that route based on. Again, I'm a person who's never been down that road, okay? But I'm a person who's seen my father go down the road of alcoholism and stuff like that, okay? It's based on which animal you choose to feed that's inside of you. You can choose to feed this hungry animal or this hungry animal, and the good one or the bad one, right? I think it's what we choose to feed sometimes, right? And it's also a lack of, maybe internally there was just a lack of, of integrity based on just the environment that we're in sometimes, you know?
Yeah, Lou,
The
I'll
devil
take full.
loves to work in places when your idol is mine.
Oh, yeah, no doubt, spending those evenings, going through that divorce, spending the evenings alone, sitting there wanting to escape from it. And it is, you lose your
Yeah,
moral compass. And again, that's the lure of the devil, he doesn't want you to get
yeah,
help. He's the one chirping in that ear, feeding that side of you, but ultimately, no matter what temptation we receive, it's who do we choose to feed? And for me, um, it was a lack of integrity. It was being someone that I despised that I ever became part of that. I despised that I ever went down that road because of all the things that I've done. And I had this same conversation with my father when he was about 91 years old. And we were just having a talk one night, and he said, Chuck, I know you've been through a lot. He said, but in my 90 years, I've never let myself go down that path. And he said, you've done things that most people would never have the mental fortitude to go through. The SWAT stuff, the tryouts for undercover
yeah,
teams, or, the SWAT tryouts, putting yourself in dangerous situations, even,
yeah,
um, most people wouldn't have the mental fortitude to do it, but then you let a substance control you. And, that's something that I beat myself up with for years. Um, and, now
yeah,
it's not that I give people a pass and say, well, come here, you've got an addiction, you've got a disease. No, that you gotta suck down and you gotta man up, because there was a number of times that
yeah,
I made the decision of the poor one at that. And, it took me years to
yeah.
get over it. It's not
Let
until
me ask you
recent.
this, man, and I appreciate your being so honest about it and taking ownership of that. I think people need to hear that,
Yeah.
especially for those who don't know you, you know, and you end up in jail. You go from being a state patrolman to a state
Prison.
penitentiary inmate. How'd you end up there, man?
Yeah, man. So, I eventually I got myself into a treatment program. So I was a uniformed trooper. I went to a place that was called Rehab After Work, and I went to another county. It was like, 30, 45 minutes away. And I would go to an outpatient meeting at night for 3 hours. And again, I lied the whole time I was there, never told anybody I was a cop. I just told people I
Okay.
had an alcohol issue just in case anyone ever recognized me. Uh, but
Yeah.
I confided in one person and told them, I asked that person to be my sponsor in the program. As you go through
Mm,
AA or NA, you get to have a sponsor that takes you through the steps, through the program. And I confided in a person that I thought was sober, that had my best interest, but I didn't realize that person was still an active paid informant, and they turned me in for money, is what I had found out. And I
Wow.
came to work. I came to work one day. I had told myself, I still had the keys to the evidence room, Lou, and I was still functioning. And I told myself, okay, I'm in treatment now. I'm starting to learn how to handle this, how to cope with it. When you get the cravings to go do something else, and started working out again. And and I came to work one day and I walked into the barracks, and there was evidence tape, like yellow caution tape, the police tape, all over the evidence room. It said no entry, under investigation, internal affairs. And at that point, I got such a pit in my stomach, and I knew my number was up. I knew that they were eventually going to tie me if they're investigating the evidence room. And I went to work for the next 32 days, Lou, knowing that any of these days I'm going to be arrested. And I walked into the barracks, and believe it or not, they actually used my friends, my buddies on the SWAT team, to actually take me down, because they knew that I always carried, and they knew that, I was driving an unmarked car full of SWAT gear. And I walked into the barracks, and they took me down. And that was, I will say unequivocally, was the worst day of my life. To be handcuffed, to be taken into the interrogation room. And immediately, I, I told everyone, hey, yeah, it was me, and I was charged with tampering with evidence. They had found that over that 8-month period that I had tampered with 72 evidence bags. And,
Wow.
the internal affairs detectives, um, they were pissed. A lot of my really good friends were pissed off at me, for justifiably so. Here's
Yeah.
someone, and when they announced, I've had so many guys tell me, when they announced that I was arrested, it was the biggest shock to everybody, because at that point I had 31 accommodations. I was a corporal. I was on a fast track. Um, the there was a guy. He was our area commander. He was a major, and he came into the interrogation room, and he said to me, he goes, Ondo, he says, you were like a son to me. You know, just 2 weeks ago,
Wow.
you were in my office with your feet up on my desk, and I'm telling you about how, you're going to become a lieutenant, a captain. You're going to be in my desk, my shoe someday. He goes, you have so embarrassed and shamed me. You're going to pay for this. And what I had found out is that,
Damn.
my charges were a misdemeanor, but they threw the book at me. They ended up lumping all the cases together, and even though it was a misdemeanor, I was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in the state prison system. So when I eventually went to my trial, um, troopers that were retired actually testified on my behalf. Guys that were active duty couldn't testify, because that's a conflict of interest. But guys that had retired that worked undercover with
Yeah.
me were able to come in and say, "Hey, it wasn't like Ondo was a bad cop for 9 years and we finally caught him." They said for the other 9.5 years, this
Right.
guy was a, um, a unbelievable cop that did a lot of good things, went above and beyond the call of duty. Uh, whatever, whatever caused him to do this, it was not like this was going on for years. But still, even given that they threw the book at me, and I initially thought I had hired an attorney. I was on the news that night. Perp walked on the news, the embarrassment, the shame, the guilt. My parents were still alive. Thank God my son was only
Wow.
like 4 years old at the time. But the
Mm.
it was a tough couple months between the day I was arrested. I was actually released on bail, and then it was about 6 months until I went to trial. There was a lot of times in there. I thank God that I didn't. I had suicidal ideations, Lou. I mean, I I didn't know what I was
Yeah.
going to do, how I was going to do this. And, I think God looked out for me, even though at that point in my life, I didn't even really turn to God. I was kind of mad at the world, mad at myself,
Yeah.
beating myself
Yeah.
up. Um, and yeah, when I was at my trial, I thought I might get like maybe house arrest or something like that because it was ultimately was a misdemeanor. Um, but when the judge hit the gavel, and said 2 to 4 years in the state prison system, and I get whisked off.
Damn.
It was another one of those days in my life that I'll never forget. Complete terror because you don't know what to expect, and what had happened is going to be on the going to be the next part of our story was worse than I can expect. You know, getting put into population. I wasn't in that jail for 15 minutes until I was in my first fight. I got put into population,
Wow.
went into a jail cell, put my, you get put into a jumpsuit. I'll never forget. It was a um, multi-tiered county jail because you go to the county for about 10 days before they put you into the state system. And so I go into the county jail, and what I didn't know is during my trial, during my sentencing hearing, all these troopers are up and they're reading into the record all these accommodations. Trooper Ondo did this, Trooper Ondo did that. He was responsible for this many arrests, blah, blah, blah. There were 8 other inmates in the courtroom waiting for their sentencing that heard this. And for whatever reason, the judge or the county sheriffs didn't even take that into consideration, and they put me right in population. So I'm in the jail cell for about 5 minutes, and 5 guys came in and they said, "We've been waiting for you, pig." And it was on. It was, I was attacked.
Damn.
And there were 5 guys, Lou, and you reach down inside, and just like I'm sure you have in your life, and you've gone through this, your attack. You just another side of you comes out, and I was able to
Yeah.
fight my way out onto the landing. And at that point, the guards blew the whistles and they locked everybody down. So I go back in my jail cell, and I had a cellmate at the time, and he's like, "Man, who are you? Like, why? Are you a snitch? Are you an informant?" And I'm like, "No, man." They He's like, "Are you a cop?" I just didn't say anything to him. I was like, "Dude, I don't want any trouble." So we sat there for about 5 hours. The entire cell block was locked down, and all I heard was guys yelling, screaming from their cells. "Cop in 387, you're dead. I got a broomstick for you. It's going up your, what?" And I thought to myself, when they open these cell doors, I got to get off. I was on the 3rd tier. And at one point during that fight, I was actually holding a guy over the railing, and his buddies were railing me on the back. And I said, "I'm going to throw him. I'm going to throw him." That's when the whistle went off, and I threw the guy on the ground. And I thought to myself, what's going to stop these guys? 5, 6 guys are going to throw me over the railing. I'm going to end up dead my first night in jail. So when the cell
Yeah.
doors open,
Yeah.
I
Wow.
got to the steps, ran down the bottom of the steps. When I got to the bottom of the steps, there was about 15 guys waiting for me. And I get in another big scuffle. And at that point, the guards noticed it right away, and they came out and they broke the fight up, and they pulled me into their little, like, it was like a soundproof little guard shack, right? They pull me in there, and they start questioning me about, "Are you an informant? Like, why does everyone attacking you?" And I told them, I said, "No, I said, I was a police officer, and they all know that." And they're like, "Man, nobody told us." And they're like, "Oh, we're going to put you in protective custody." So they took and they stuck me in the hole. And man, I don't know. I'd have rather
Wow.
been fighting than sitting in that hole. I sat in that hole for 10 days. It was 23 hours a day. You don't know what's happening. You have no access to a phone. You have no access to anything. And they were just some of the most miserable
Wow.
days of my life.
Wow. How
So,
how much time do you end up doing?
okay, so I ended up only doing about 13 months inside. So what had happened after 10 days in the county sheriffs picked me up, and they were taking me to the state prison, and they were taking me to a state prison where there had to be I don't know, probably 50, 60 guys that I had arrested before, some of them on murder charges. So I asked the sheriffs that were transporting me. I said, "You guys got to let me call my attorney. If they put me in that jail, and that's that jail, I'm dead." So one of the sheriffs, out of the kindness of his heart, called my attorney. My attorney got on the phone with the warden of that jail, and when I got there, they stuck me in the hole right away. So I was in protective custody right away. Then I
Yeah.
was there for 10 days. Then they took me to another prison. And the prison they took me to, it was called Camp Hill. And back in 1990, I was at Camp Hill as a trooper. There was a big prison riot there. And we had trained at that jail. So I get to that
Mm,
jail and the guards were I'll just put it this way, they 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 really they pulled me into a room and they're like, we know who you are. You're a piece of shit. You ruined, you destroyed the integrity of the state police. We're going to make your life horrible if you try and escape from here. And I'm like, guys, I don't want to escape. I don't want to do anything. Uh, so what they did is they put me in the hole there for about 30 days and they found a prison. I guess what they had to do is they had to cross reference all of my arrests, and they found a prison out in Western Pennsylvania where there was no one that I arrested, and they put me there in population, and that's where I did another 13 months of my time, and no one knew I was a cop.
wow.
So I was still a prisoner.
Wow.
I still had to go through, what everybody goes through in jail and the normal initiation and fights and this and that. But I was able to make parole, and after 13 months. But yeah, that was that. What that did to me though is it changed my whole perspective. And Lou, you can relate to this as a police officer. You arrest a bad guy, right? You go to court, you testify against him.
Yeah.
You never really think about him as a human being again. You know, it's not that you have any bad thoughts
Right.
about him. You just, hey, the guy's doing his time. He got what he got, right? But here I was sitting in prison with guys, and they're real people, and they're remorseful. And I became friends with a lot of guys that and it gave me a whole new perspective. And now when I go into the jails uh for my prison ministry that I do now, I tell the guys, I can relate to you, man. I've been where you've been. I've been in your shoes. I've been in a jumpsuit. I know what it means to have all of your privileges taken and being told when you can go. So I went from, as a state trooper, you control society, right? I went from being in control to being totally controlled. And some of the guards were pretty rough on me, knowing that they knew I was a cop. They didn't tell anybody, but they they bullied me around a lot, and I just had to kind of take it, uh, knowing that I just want to get out of here. So after 13 months, I was
Yeah.
released, and I did the other 3 years on parole. But
So
it gave me
so
a whole new perspective.
yeah, yeah. I want to go back to that, how they ended up charging you. They made it a felony charge. Is that what they did?
No, it was a misdemeanor arrest, but what they did is they ran everything consecutive. So it was 72 counts. So let's say the maximum sentence for that was, 4 months for each charge. It was 4 months times 70. That's how they ended up coming with that
I see.
that 4 year
And
sentence, a
so
48-month sentence. Mm.
got it. Wow. So they stacked a bunch of all though they didn't stack them, it was a 72 charges of misdemeanors totaling that sentence.
Correct.
What would have happened to any other person had they done that?
They may have gotten some house arrest, probably just probation,
Yeah.
and I
Now,
I knew that
do
when
you
the guy that was my supervisor, that the major with the state police, when he said, "You're going to pay for this for embarrassing me," that there was probably phone calls made and give this guy his max sentence,
yeah.
and
Do you think do you think that by getting that max sentence versus getting a slap on the wrist, do you think that kept you from using again?
You know,
At least the drugs.
yeah, yeah, that probably had a lot to do with it. Um, and I look at this like anything that I went through it was supposed to happen, that there were lessons to be learned,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know, if it was a slap on the wrist, would I have easily gone back into that? That's a good possibility. I just
Yeah.
I just thank God that I
'Cause-
was able to kind of dial back into to who I was, someone with integrity, somebody with moral compass. And, but then later in life, alcohol crept back into my life 10 times worse than drugs ever
Yeah.
were. I had
Yeah.
restarted my life. I got married. I had
Yeah.
a daughter. I had a business. I became a barber, had gone through a second divorce. And that's kind of the second downfall of my life. I started
Yeah.
drinking every night. And just like it was with and I probably drank socially for 3 decades, all through my 30s, 40s, here I was late 40s, early 50s. And, in a matter of months I identified myself, Lou, as a suicidal alcoholic. Like I just would go on binges for days,
Jesus.
barely functioning.
What
Um,
years? What years were you locked up?
so I was locked up back in 99 to 2000. I got off parole in 2003. So when I'm off parole, it's when I get married, and everything in my life was normal. I had a good life. I was a dad. I had my daughter. I got partial custody of my son. And it wasn't
Yeah.
till about 2016 that until alcohol crept into my life. And then from 2016 till about 5 years ago, um, I had been in and out of rehabs for alcohol. I had gotten
Jeez.
arrested 5 times, DUI, public drunkenness, assault, just, my life spiraled out of control again. And, um, and finally, it was July 4th, Independence Day, 2021. I checked into the VA and I spent 90 days in a rehab program. And I've been sober since, Lou.
Wow.
And
Good, man.
but
Good.
I was
Did you at any point, you at any point feel like a victim in this whole thing?
there were times, you get the victim mentality, like woe is me, if you've been through what I've been through. Um, you know, the second divorce, made me feel like a failure, and what had happened during that time. Like I reconnected with so many of my state trooper friends, and they said to me, Chuck, you were a good guy. You made a mistake. You paid a hell of a price. We're still friends. But I started watching those guys retire, and here I was, I have a good career as a barber, but I'm thinking to myself, man, here I am. I could be fully retired. Like, a lot of these guys, a lot of my really close friends, I was on the SWAT team. Uh, they retire from the state police, and a lot of them got jobs working security for the NFL, and they're doing really well in life. And then that's when I started to throw a pity party, and
Yeah.
just just drink and drown my sorrows,
So,
pour me another drink. And that's again where my life really spiraled down.
well, Ando, tell me,
Yep.
man. First of all, I want to thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for your honesty. Okay, it takes a
Yeah.
lot to be honest, and it's hard to tell on yourself. I know. Okay,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell on yourself. What are you doing now? Tell me about semperfimission.org. Tell me about this organization that you are the co-founder of. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So I get out of treatment, and I ended up meeting an evangelist who's now my pastor, and he kind of led me to the Lord, and he started a church. And once I dedicated my life to the Lord, like my whole life totally changed. And this was in 2021, 22. I get a phone call from some guys I used to work undercover with. And they tell me, hey, Ondo, we started this program. It was based out of St. Joe's University in Philadelphia, and it's called the Center for Addiction and Recovery Education. We have a program where we're teaching police officers about the disease of addiction. Would you consider coming and being a consultant with us and go out to the police departments across the country, across the state, and tell your story and teach people about, there was like a 4-hour course that we taught. So that to me was such redemption. And I'll never forget, I got the call to go back to the State Police Academy. So, I hadn't been to the academy since I gotten fired. Or actually, just so I can clear this up, after I got arrested, I was able to resign from the state police. So I'm actually considered officially retired. I would have eventually been fired. So I just retired and have an official retirement status. So for years, I didn't even tell people that I was a cop. The story that I just shared with you 10 years ago, you'd have never heard me talk about. I just didn't tell people about that. Now, because I've turned it around, I'm very open about it. But, I remember driving back up to there's a state police academy sits on a hill, and I'm driving up there, and I just felt like, man, God has restored everything in my life. So I start going to police departments. I ended up giving this class to the county sheriffs here. The county in Pittsburgh is Allegheny County, and I gave the class over 4 days to about 90 police officers. And one of the police officers oversees Veterans Court. He said, Chuck, why don't you come into Veterans Court and tell your story of how you've turned your life back around? So I went in, talked.
Yeah.
The judge that oversaw Veterans Court was friends with the warden for the county jail. She called the warden. The warden had me come in to meet the guys on the veterans pod in the local county jail. And I came in, kind of gave my story, gave my testimony. I thought it was a one-time deal. Lou, this Monday was my 121st visit back in there. I go every Monday. I spend the first 2 hours of every week sitting with the guys, telling them that they can turn their life around, that I know what it feels like to be there. So I was, I'm teaching these classes. I'm now going in to the jails, and then I meet a guy, and his name is Ken. And like me, Ken was a former Marine. He was injured in combat. Had traumatic brain injury, was put on pain pills, got medically discharged. And he's one of them. When I deal with a lot of homeless veterans now, and Lou, when we look at the homeless veteran population, there's a large percentage of them that were injured, serving our country.
Yeah.
That were put on these pain pills, but then they're discharged. And a lot of these guys, try and buy pills on the street. Those pills turn to a heroin addiction. So Ken, who's my co-founder with the Semper Fi mission, it was God that connected us. His sister referred him to me. Just like, hey, there's this barber. His name's Chuck, and he's like you. He's a Marine. Ken was a homeless heroin addict. Ended up going to the VA, getting treatment, and ended up becoming he's working for a state representative as her chief of staff. So he had turned his life around. So we met and we started going out into the city, into downtown Pittsburgh, to the homeless tent camps, feeding people, finding if they're veterans, trying to get them connected to the VA hospital. And, so now I'm a full-time barber. I'm a part-time consultant, teaching these classes. And there was one day I was driving towards the city, and there's a lot of bridges here in Pittsburgh, and you'll see a lot of the homeless population right where you're near the bridge or a tunnel with signs, panhandling. And I saw a guy that said, homeless veteran, anything will help. And he had long hair and he had a long beard. And I said to him, you know what? Yeah. I'm a barber. Why don't you jump in my truck? I'm going to clean you up. So I took him to my barber shop. as I'm cutting his hair and trimming his
Yeah.
beard, Lou, I'm telling him my story. I'm like, hey, man, I know what you're going through. I've been through addiction. I've been to prison. You could turn it all around. And I drove him from my barber shop to the VA hospital and checked him in. Took him to the emergency room, checked him into
Good, man.
detox. And I did it again the next week and then the following week. And then I realized, haircutting is a pretty cool way to have a conversation with someone and try and talk them into treatment, tell them a little bit
Minister.
of God. So we ended up starting something. We actually call it prayer cuts. We use a church in downtown Pittsburgh. We go out and hand flyers out, and we invite people once a month. I got a team of barbers. We provide a meal, clothing, hygiene items. We cut their hair and we try and get them into treatment. That's the whole purpose of it. So we're doing all this stuff. And I had a dream, Lou. And in my dream, I was addressing a large crowd of prisoners, like something you'd see like San Quentin prison, like hundreds of guys out in the yard. They're all in blue. And in my dream, I grabbed the microphone and I said, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Chuck. This is my brother, Ken." I said, "We represent the Semper Fi mission and we're here to lead you to the Lord." As soon as I said that, I sat up in bed, I grabbed my phone and I Googled Semper Fi mission, and that URL was available. I bought that URL at 3:15 in the morning.
Love it.
Semper Fi mission. I called Ken the next day and I said, "Ken, God just gave me a name." And I sat down the next day and I designed this logo. And the logo is, one brother reaching down, pulling him up, leading him to the Lord. And our mission is to like build God's army here in Pittsburgh and then from it. So we've gone from doing a prison ministry. We do homeless outreach. We'll go down into like a city park and we'll set up and we'll feed the guys,
Yeah.
gals. And we quickly realized that, there is a large percentage of homeless veterans, but we'll help anybody. We now have a recovery
Right
house.
on,
It's
man.
called Cornerstone House. It's a 10-bedroom
Wow.
house where guys come out of the
Dang.
jail. We give them a place to live. And
Well,
in
Chuck, you
yeah,
what I got to thank you for everything that you've done afterward, because most people I thank you because you didn't become a bigger problem for society, right? But I also praise you for uh owning up to your mistakes and turning this bad situation into something good is and keeping that you have a very positive outlook, very positive attitude, very honest, and I'm thankful for that. Um, where can people find you, man? Where can people find you
yeah,
at simplifymission.org? Is there a
yes.
Facebook page for it as well, or what else you got?
Yeah, Lou. So we're across social media. Um, Semper Fi Mission on Instagram, on Facebook, semperfimission.org. If you're in the Western Pennsylvania area and you want to get involved, we have a volunteer tab on there. Click on the volunteer tab. We we have at least 30 or 40 different 40 different events that we do across the city. And we also have an event coming up. There was a veteran that we've been working with for the last 2 years. His name was Jerry, and unfortunately, he took his life back in March. And we're planning a 5K, and you can find that at patriots5k.org. We have that URL as well. We're doing a 5K, and all the proceeds from that, Lou, are going to go. Jerry had two little girls, 6 and 3 years old. All the proceeds are going to go to a college scholarship fund for them. So yeah, we've got all that going on.
Yeah,
Facility. It was a former nursing home. We're going to turn that into a
nice.
workforce development classes. So we're going to make an impact. And again, we're going to take. I like to say that we took our mess and turned it into a message, and it feels so good to give
I
back,
love it,
and
man.
it was hell to go through what I went through, but the amount of lives that we've been able to impact
Damn,
since
Chuck,
is
honesty and I have faith that you're gonna stay on the path of righteousness and be able to keep helping those men and women who you can relate to, and I think you relate to a lot of people, and you potentially open the eyes of a lot of folks. So those of you watching today, if you like what you saw today, give it a like, give it a subscribe, give it a share. I think people need to hear this message from a man like Chuck Ondo, a Marine, state trooper, having made some terrible mistakes, ended up locked up in a state prison, and now finding a mission and helping others be able to get their life on the right track from prayer cuts to semper5mission.org. Check out their pages, follow them, subscribe to them, perhaps maybe even be part of their 5K they have coming up in your area. So my name is Lou Pimber. Grateful for you guys watching today. I'm touched by this story, man. If you have someone out there you know who has a story, share it with me. Shoot me an email, loupimber@gmail.com. I'd love to share it. Mel, again, thank you for this introduction to this gentleman right here. And I hope that we'll talk again, sir. Keep up the good work. And always stay faithful, my friend. Stay faithful.
Absolutely. Semper Fi.
Thank you, Chuck. Stand by to
Thank
stand
you,
by.
brother.